they will sink into a dictatorship from which there are very few possible alternatives.
We're talking about the growing and virulent nature of anti-Semitism.
Some students work really hard, yet their spots are being taken away by people who don't deserve it.
We have so little time left together, and yet our system forces us to waste it dealing with bills and bureaucracy.
A 32-year-old activist diagnosed with ALS spoke at the first ever congressional hearing on Medicare for All today, which, surprisingly for such a divisive issue, wasn't a total train wreck. Opponents of Representative Pramila Jayapal's Medicare for All measure say Democrats haven't come up with how to pay for it or even how much it'll cost. But we're about to get a better sense. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office is set to release its estimate tomorrow. President Trump wants people seeking asylum to pay fees for their applications and work permits, and he's giving his administration 90 days to turn his wishes into regulations. Trump laid out his demands in a memo that also directs courts to settle asylum claims within 180 days of filing and calls for banning migrants who enter illegally from getting their work permits until a judge hears their case. Indonesia's government says it wants to move the capital to a new city on another island, though it hasn't yet said where. President Joko Widodo cited environmental concerns. Jakarta is one of the world's fastest sinking cities, but the more immediate issue is overcrowding. Jakarta also has some of the world's worst traffic, blamed for more than $6 billion a year in lost productivity. In a symbolic ceremony, Japan's Emperor Akihito stepped down from his symbolic role by handing back some symbolic items: a sword, a jewel, and 2 seals. It's the first time in more than 200 years that a Japanese emperor has abdicated. Akihito's seat will go to his eldest son, Naruhito.
Today, the streets of Venezuela's capital erupted into chaos once again. The authorities brutally suppressed the uprising, even running over protesters with an armored truck. More than 50 people have been injured. This time, it isn't just civilians showing their anger at President Nicolás Maduro. A number of soldiers defected to the opposition and attempted to stage a coup. The defectors wore blue armbands and traded fire with the National Guard. Protesters are answering a call from Juan Guaidó, the opposition leader who declared himself president in January. This morning, he said from a military base that this was the final phase in his plan to overthrow Maduro.
Los invito inmediatamente a activarse. Los invito inmediatamente a cubrir las calles de Venezuela. El 1 de mayo empezó hoy. El cese definitivo de la usurpación empezó hoy.
Guaidó was there with his mentor, Leopoldo López, the longtime face of the opposition, who has spent the last 5 years between prison and house arrest. Until this morning, when he says he was freed by soldiers.
Está la mayoría de los hombres y mujeres de uniforme están conscientes de que tiene que haber un cambio en Venezuela. Y les hacemos ese llamado a todos para que se sumen a este proceso, un proceso de unificación de la Fuerza Armada con el pueblo venezolano. Muchas gracias.
López and his family have since taken refuge in the home of the Chilean ambassador in Caracas. The coup attempt has the enthusiastic backing of the U.S., especially Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton.
If this effort fails, they will sink into a dictatorship from which there are very few possible alternatives.
Maduro hasn't shown his face today. On Twitter, he said the coup has been defeated and that most of the armed forces remain loyal. If Maduro does remain in power, it's unlikely that Guaidó will be a free man for long. We spoke to Guaidó. He was aware of the risks.
¿Ustedes están haciendo algo para prepararse para esa posible eventualidad? para...
La posible eventualidad de que usted
sí, claro,
termine arrestado. Sí.
Es una posibilidad. En Venezuela el ejercicio de la política está criminalizado, no solamente de la política, del periodismo, de las libertades sindicales, de disentir, sencillamente de agarrar una cacerola y sonarla cercano al centro de Caracas, enviaron paramilitares armados. Así que es una posibilidad latente, hay que estar preparados en torno a los objetivos, que es generar una transición pacífica en Venezuela que nos lleve a una elección realmente libre luego del cese de la usurpación.
Por ahora, Maduro se ha aferrado al poder. A mí, por lo menos, no me parece que hay una nueva estrategia clara por parte de la oposición. ¿Cómo ve usted el futuro? ¿Cómo ve el camino?
¿Cuál debe ser la ruta? Insistir. O sea, podría sonar trillado, pero la verdad la ruta cuando enfrentamos a una dictadura con la no violencia, con la Constitución, con la movilización, nuestra gran defensa, nuestra gran posibilidad de avance es continuar con una ruta muy clara.
Venezuela is once again at a crossroad. The coup won't succeed without bloodshed. And if it fails, Maduro will only tighten his authoritarian grip. What seems less likely than ever is a peaceful transition.
Yesterday, mourners in San Diego buried Lori Gilbert Kay. She was shot to death on Saturday when a 19-year-old white supremacist attacked a synagogue in the nearby suburb of Poway. In some ways, this attack has brought the American Jewish community together. But it also seems to be dividing it over which side of the political spectrum is to blame for the rise in anti-Semitism.
Hello, everybody. So I want to thank you all for coming here. You all know yesterday was a pretty terrible day because we're talking about the growing and virulent nature of anti-Semitism. We're talking about the anti-Zionism is, quote, not anti-Semitism phenomenon.
Micha Danzig runs a local chapter of a pro-Israel group called Stand With Us. He's a former NYPD cop who also served in the Israeli military.
We can't underestimate the virus-like nature of anti-Semitism. Just the other day, the New York Times published a cartoon in its international version of the New York Times where it depicted a dog with a Jewish Star of David on its collar, and he's leading a blind president of the United States with a yarmulke, a Jewish kippah on his head. They never thought about the anti-Semitism inherent in that cartoon because they thought they were punching up against this powerful, the Jew among the nations now, which is Israel.
On its face, it seems like the person who did this terrible thing on Saturday, I mean, he's pretty clearly an avowed white supremacist.
100%.
He's about as far to the right as you can get. And so those two things seem to be fairly different, don't they?
I don't believe in far right and far left. I believe in horseshoe. You take David Duke and Louis Farrakhan, right? They don't agree on anything but their hatred for the Jews.
Recently, commentators like Danzig have been pointing to one person in particular as an example of this anti-Semitism. Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who's constantly in trouble for making comments about Israel's influence on American policy.
I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country.
The day after the shooting, members of Congress, including Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Chip Roy, essentially blamed the attack on Omar and the New York Times.
These slurs, whether they're coming from a woman in Congress, right? Or they're coming from a white nationalist in Congress like Stephen King, or they're coming from a guy like David Duke and all the crazy stuff that's on the internet that this kid was obviously soaking in, right? It affects us. It affects us, and it normalizes anti-Semitism. It normalizes the hate that leads people to kill.
Is it possible to have a conversation in which you are having a conversation about politics, criticizing the state of Israel, where you're not being anti-Semitic?
Of course. You want to criticize a particular policy? That's fine. When you demonize the country that is the only Jewish country in the world, the country where half of the world's Jews live, you're engaging in anti-Semitism.
One of the voices pushing back on the attacks on Ilhan Omar was If Not Now, a liberal Jewish group. They accuse conservatives of using the attack to try to silence criticism of Israel. Mariama Scott is one of the founders of If Not Now's San Diego branch.
I've had lots of other Jews in this city tell me that I'm a self-hating Jew, tell me that I'm just as bad as Nazis, because...
You said that?
Yes, I've had that said to me.
And why?
Because I criticize Israel, because I'm against the occupation.
It seems like a lot of concern is not just about anti-Semitism on the right. There seems to be a lot of concern about anti-Semitism on what people say is the far left.
There is anti-Semitism on the left. There's anti-Semitism everywhere. That's true. But to equate the types of anti-Semitism on the left with the types of anti-Semitism on the right is really offensive to me. There's certain kinds of rhetoric that is leading to Jews getting killed. And it's not Ilhan Omar. We're going on this witch hunt after her for maybe a little bit insensitive comment when our sitting president says things like Nazis are fine people.
It seems like the right and the left right now are using this as kind of an opportunity to ride their own agendas. I mean, do you feel like you're being used?
Of course, I'm nobody's pawn here, right? My people aren't anybody's pawn here. I want a stand against anti-Semitism, period.
I don't know if I'd call this week a full-blown infrastructure week, of which there have been many.
Secretary Chow kicked off Infrastructure Week.
And on Wednesday, Infrastructure Week continues. Is it Infrastructure Week? When is it?
What I would call this is Infrastructure Day, because President Trump, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer met to talk about one of the few bipartisan issues this country still has, fixing our aging roads, bridges, and waterways. And the meeting, according to both sides, went pretty well.
We did come to one agreement that the agreement would be big and bold.
We agreed on a number, which was very, very good, $2 trillion for infrastructure. Originally, we had started a little lower. Even the president was eager to push it up.
$2 trillion is actually more than the $1 trillion investment Trump was hoping for in his 2020 budget. But he seems fine with the bigger number because talking about rebuilding America's infrastructure is something the president has been remarkably consistent on. Back in 2018, the White House outlined an infrastructure plan that went nowhere. Their 2020 budget hinted at wanting much of the same. Now it'll be pretty difficult for Democrats and Republicans to agree on a funding mechanism that gets the country to $2 trillion worth of investment. But if you're in a good mood today and you're willing to put practicalities aside, like how to pay for it, then perhaps, there is a small window before 2020 really gets going to get something done on our crumbling infrastructure. We could end on that hint of optimism, but this is DC, so as usual, a dose of reality is necessary. First, there was someone conspicuously missing from the White House today, Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Can you do big and bold without Senator McConnell in the room?
Mr. President has to leave.
Which is basically what McConnell is waiting on the sidelines for.
If you want to do a really significant, large infrastructure bill, we need to have a lot of straight talk from everybody on both sides about how you're going to pay for it.
McConnell has already said he isn't for deficit spending, like the stimulus package from 2009. But many Democrats don't think public-private partnerships, the kind of things that tend to get toll roads built, will generate enough money to do anything big and bold. And Congress is wishy-washy on increasing the 18.4-cent federal gas tax, which helps provide funding to improve roads and bridges. It hasn't been raised since 1993. I talked to DJ Gribben, the guy who helped the president develop his first infrastructure plan.
You need to raise revenue somehow. All revenue for infrastructure comes from taxpayers and users. So there's no third source that you can go to. But at the end of the day, we're all going to have to pay for improved infrastructure. And so the challenge is, how do you convince all of us who are paying for this improved infrastructure that they've figured out a payment mechanism that will deliver value back to those who are making those payments.
Behind the scenes on the Hill, a rank-and-file Democratic chief of staff told me that today's meeting was just, quote, optics at its finest. That person pointed out that each Congress starts with optimism around a bipartisan infrastructure plan, and it never happens. And the reason why it never happens is that campaign politics usually make it hard for both sides to work together.
What is a bigger priority for Democrats, investigating the president or trying to work with him?
Our priority is to honor our responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States, to meet the needs of the American people, and to honor our oath of office.
In previous meetings, the president has said, if these investigations continue, I can't work with you. He didn't bring it up.
Schumer and Pelosi, especially now that the House is in Democrats' hands, want to look like they are leading on something that doesn't divide the country. And today, since they were the voices bringing us the good news of a cordial meeting inside the White House, they got the benefit of at least looking like adults who can still focus on getting something done rather than getting someone out.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Every year, millions of high school students spend their spring break visiting college campuses with their families.
Oh, we didn't get to see that.
But for kids from low-income communities, those trips can be impossibly expensive.
They were selling frisbees?
So now, nonprofits are stepping in to help.
College match. My name is Mariela Barales. I'm 17 years old, and I'm about to go visit colleges in the East Coast. I want to see how different it is. I try hard in school because I know that my parents didn't get the opportunity to go to school. They never made it past middle school. Sí comí, pero también comí en la escuela. The reason both of them came over here was because they didn't have opportunities to succeed in Mexico.
Bye, Angel. Bye, Angel.
I've been to Sacramento, and that was by bus. I've never flown.
So we're gonna follow Lisa out to the bus. The way we're gonna load the bus. Yes.
Most of our students go to high schools where they have one college counselor to serve 500, maybe 600 students. If you go to a private high school, you have parents who have the resources and who have the education to help navigate the college application process. So it's obvious that the admission field is not equal. Different zip codes have different resources.
I do want to point out this building here to your right. This is a first-year dorm. We'll go in another in a little bit, but I do want to point out that white plaque on the third floor denotes where Henry Wadsworth Longfellow lived, and he was a student at Bowdoin. As for the system themselves, was that a question?
Yeah, I didn't hear earlier if you said that the pairing with your roommate was random, or?
Oh, that's a good point. So in the summer before your first year, you actually take an 80-question survey, and it helps Res Life pair you with students who are going to help you kind of thrive through your first year.
I go to Garfield High School, and there's like 2,700 students. It's a pretty big school. I think they focus a lot on students who are failing. We don't offer really classes for people who want to get ahead.
We're gonna head inside, and Claudia will take over.
When you guys first heard that you were coming to visit Maine, what were the first things that came to mind?
Cold.
All right, yeah, so you're experiencing some of the cold. Again, it gets colder, but it's okay. What else?
Snow.
Snow, yep. Thank you. I'm always white in which way? That's true. Maine is usually the #1 or #2 state for having the least amount of diversity. That's different on campus, but that's also one of those opportunities. We have first-generation college students, underrepresented students across our curriculum, and the purpose for what they see their education meaning for them and their family, I think also helps the rest of the student body realize that there's more to an education than just the career outcome. I think our first-generation college students see that a little bit more clearly and don't take anything for granted.
These tours have been tiring physically, but I think they've opened my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know before. especially when it comes to how colleges work.
Do you guys want snacks or a meal? Are you guys like really hungry or just?
I just want snacks. It's kind of hungry. It's whatever, so.
We have, do you guys know where Figueroa is? Back home?
Yeah.
La Figueroa? Okay, so you know how No, yeah.
Brown would be a great place since you don't know what you want to study. Yeah. So, how about you?
Well, I just know that I don't want to go into the math or like science. I don't want to do anything STEM related.
So it's humanities pretty much?
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome to Wellesley. My name is Joy. I'm going to be your tour guide today. I'm currently a junior here at Wellesley College. And then there's a really cute little ceremony in the chapel, and then everyone goes to brunch afterwards. It's one of my favorite meals of the year.
I just hope that's the dining hall we eat at. I want to eat there.
Yeah.
It looks so fancy. And so old.
I don't think I realized how much work it is to pay attention to every college and what makes every college look different. This campus is like, the buildings are beautiful, yeah. It looks like a castle.
You taught me it, but I forgot how to do it.
With the final stripes. One more school.
No, I don't want to leave.
Go.
We never finished our Uno game.
Oh, yeah, we never did. Oh, should we do that?
Yeah.
This is this side.
A lot of them are interesting. They have sociology here, mathematics. No. But they have cool ones. Yeah. The East Coast has been really different.
I'm sorry about the wind.
Not only weather-wise, because it's really cold out here, but also just culture-wise. The people here are they're different from what I see at home.
They have a lot of different options, so if you're vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, they have something for everybody.
It really comes into play when you see these colleges and who makes up the student body. And I think that's one factor that I'm definitely considering like as I go on to my application process.
Okay. Como 6 meses.
While touring the schools, that idea like often popped into my head about how, especially now, people have been paying their way to college. And it's really disheartening to know that some students work really hard and they study for long hours, yet their spots are being taken away by people who don't deserve it. And just being at these prestigious schools, it really opened my eyes to how hard it is to get into a school that has such a big name. I want to do it by means like that I did it.